Thank you. Thank you. No, no. Please stop. Please stop. Really, really. Thank you. Thank you so much. So as I was about to say, yesterday's accomplishment was simply astonishing. I mean, really something special. Virgin Orbit is going on to bigger and better. Who the bloody hell could be ringing me up right now? I won't be a moment. It won't be a moment. Hello? I know it was you. Yeah, I saw you. I saw you on the news. You said, Jeff who? Jeff who? What? Is this becoming something popular amongst every other billionaire around? Is Elon like your idol or something like that? Jeff who? Like that was real original. Ha ha ha. Look, old boy, that was just a bit of a lark, all right? Nothing serious, and besides, it's certainly not the most risky thing that I've ever done. So why did you call me anyway? Oh, I don't know, maybe to let you know that I'm going to space before you are, even though you've been working on it forever. How about that? Oh, that may be so, old boy, but you're not going to do it with the same kind of style. Fiona, why don't you and your partner come out here for a moment? See, that's what style is all about there, Jeff. I know you don't have much of an understanding of that. Oh, and by the way, going to space, I rather think that also means going to orbit. I think that Elon had something to say about that as well. Don't say it. Don't say it. You better not say it. Oh, don't worry, Jeff. I rather think I've made my point about getting things up to orbit, but in the meantime, I'm afraid I've got other things to be doing. No, you're not getting away with this. Not yet. And guess what, little man? What, you call yourself a billionaire with what, $6 billion? I've got over 100, boy. What do you gotta say to that? Well, first of all, I can make my hair do this. Oh, hair, I shouldn't have brought that up. Well, aside from that, if I had spent the same sort of money that you had on my company, I would have bankrupted myself years ago, and I would have had to go back to Blackheath and go on the dole. And yet, I've got into orbit twice. And what have you done exactly, Jeff? What was that, Richard? I couldn't hear you over the sound of my private rocket that I'm taking, along with a customer who paid $28 million for the privilege. Democratization of space, my ass. Well, have fun on that suborbital bungee jump. I'm going kite surfing with a few of my, mates. Cheerio! What? Where'd you go? Hello? Hello? Arrogant English mother. Good morning, and welcome to another episode of the Angry Astronaut. So, I hope everybody enjoyed the chaos yesterday as I was chasing things around. That thing, namely being Cosmic Girl. It was something else. And for those of you who haven't watched the live stream, please do so. It was really amazing to see how quickly they moved from a refueling position and doing work on the rocket, ground crews running around underneath the plane, etc., to take off. I mean, it happened within minutes. It was extremely impressive and something, frankly, that I was unaccustomed to, having filmed all these rocket launches. I mean, you need to clear the pad, you need to clear the area and exclusion zone, all that sort of thing. Nope. let's get it fueled up and let's go. It is a very swift process, one that doesn't involve a whole lot of complexity, at least in terms of logistics. And that is one of the big advantages that this system has. And however, at the same time, you may be asking yourself, why am I doing this comparison with Blue Origin? Am I just, jumping on Jeff Bezos because I enjoy it or something? Well, kinda, but no. Actually, there is an important reason, an important similarity between these companies that goes beyond the whole space tourism thing. It's also the fact that we're talking about multi-billionaire companies that are trying to go to space and trying to reach orbit for the good of mankind. Both Blue Origin and Virgin Orbit have the same stated intentions, although Virgin Orbit, of course, mostly in terms of not getting mankind out into space, but rather increasing the accessibility to space from scientific institutions, the military, whoever wants to go to space when they want to go and where they want to go for a low price. And so far, they've been able to accomplish that. This mission was an extremely important moment in their history. Blue Origin, on the other hand, has still yet to take any passengers up on New Shepard. That'll be changing very soon, but it has yet to happen. And as far as orbit is concerned, there's no sign that that's going to be happening anytime soon. And as I mentioned in my little comedy act at the beginning, Richard Branson and his personal fortune, not saying the guy's poor, but if he had invested as much of his personal money in the amount of time since he started the concept of Virgin Orbit in 2013, if he had plugged in $1 billion a year, the way that Jeff plugs $1 billion a year into Blue Origin, he would have bankrupted himself. That's how much money we're talking about. And yet, Virgin Orbit now has been to orbit twice. They've delivered numerous customers, well over a dozen, closing in on 2 dozen now, actually. Didn't take an exact count beforehand, but still, and significant customers. The US military, of course. The Belgians, their very first military satellite. Now, some may say, why is that important? Well, Belgium is where NATO is headquartered. You do something for them, and you get NATO as a customer in the future. But there is another very important customer that is going to lead to a hell of a lot of revenue for Virgin Orbit. We're not talking about just revenue. We're talking about information for the good of humanity. And this comes from a Polish based company called SatRevolution. And I'm going to be talking in depth about them and what their long term goals are and what getting these 2 satellites into orbit mean for this company and for the future of their constellation, and indeed what it's going to do for the future of the human race. All of these things Virgin Orbit has accomplished on top of the whole space tourism thing. What do we have for all the money that's been invested so far in BO? Not a whole lot. And I really don't understand why. And it's why I keep hammering on him. But I'm going to stop with that right now. So this is how everything started out for me in Mojave, right on Highway 58, just a couple of minutes from my hotel. Literally 2 minutes down the road was Cosmic Girl in plain sight of everything. It was quite amazing. I was able to get some close-up shots of Launcher 1, at least as close as people wanted me to, but I felt sort of wrong and was curious as to whether or not I was going to get security angry at me. So sometimes I restricted things to these kinds of quick pass by, commando kind of shots, although frankly it was completely unnecessary. So, after a bit of this, I positioned myself that morning right as the sun was coming up, and you can just see Cosmic Girl and her tail off there in the distance, where I thought would be an inconspicuous location to set up while they were doing their refueling and everything else that was necessary to prep for launch. I thought I had plenty of time, and I was very, very wrong. As I was repositioning to try to get a better shot of the sun coming up just behind Cosmic Girl, Virgin Orbit were getting ready to taxi this beast out onto the runway and to send it on its way out over the Pacific to discharge its cargo. Didn't they know what I was doing? So it was time to go. Cosmic Girl was taxiing into position. Everything was looking nominal, and here I was at the Comfort Inn. By the way, a very nice hotel, desperately trying to get into position. My partner in Yorkshire thought that it was utterly impossible for me to get into position in time given what he was looking at. Fortunately, I had no idea what the hell he was looking at. Oh, by the way, over there on the right, a Convair aircraft from NASA used to test the space shuttle's landing gear. Who gives a crap about that? I certainly didn't at the time, as I was rushing towards my destination. And I did make it just in time to watch the girl go flying overhead. And yeah, it's just a 747 flying overhead, but still, it was hypnotic. And as you can see, I also jumped through a time warp, getting to see it before everybody else did. No, it's because I had a terrible lag in terms of the Virgin Orbit feed versus mine, but still, it was fantastic. If you want to hear the sound that I heard, go and check out my live stream. Oh, and by the way, Sir Richard was there with me, not far away, really. And as he watched Cosmic Girl go from a much better vantage point, well, I don't know if he had one or not. I was actually right down there. But still, we were both there, and I feel honored. And the reason I'm honored is because of the payload that this vehicle was carrying. Launcher 1 had several customers, but my favorite was SatRevolution and its Stork satellite, actually a ScopeSat is what it could also be called, capable of observing things on the planet to a resolution of 5 meters. Now, there are better military satellites that can give better resolution, but nevertheless, these things are pretty damned impressive, and they intend to have quite a few of them deployed in a very short amount of time, and they have a contract with Virgin Orbit to deploy these things, and there's going to be a hell of a lot of them, over 1,000 over the long term. Now, of course, you can read about what these things are capable of, but there's some other details as well. I dislike the term CubeSat because a CubeSat, by definition, is 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters, at least for a 1U CubeSat, and this is much larger than that. As a matter of fact, each of these Stork satellites are capable of carrying their own CubeSats. 6 satellites that are 0.25U, yes, they get that small, 3 more of 0.5U, and another slot that could carry a 1U CubeSat. So this is something that can carry 10 CubeSats by itself for their own independent purposes. And as you can see, it can be used for all sorts of things, from farming to civil application to military intelligence, all sorts of things that these satellites will be useful for as they travel at an altitude of 500 kilometers, which is out of the way of most space junk, which tends to reside at a higher altitude. Reason being, satellites at this altitude tend to go into the atmosphere within a couple of decades. And by the way, this thing runs off of a 75 watt power supply. less than that of old-fashioned incandescent light bulbs. And yet, in spite of that, its main processor has a 1216 megahertz capacitor, along with up to 16 gigs worth of memory. Not bad for a tiny little satellite that has 75 watts worth of power, substantially less than what your laptop is pulling at this moment. Now, this little guy uses gyroscopes and sun sensors in order to make sure that it's pointed in the right direction. And as I mentioned before, it can gather a lot of optical information, down to a size of 5.8 meters, and that's at a height of 500 kilometers. But its field of view is massive. It can gather 3,800 square kilometers worth of data, and its daily coverage is 61,400 square kilometers. What a huge amount of visual information, and this can be used for so many important tasks. And that's one satellite again, powered by 75 watts. This is what micro-miniaturized technology has brought us, and why little carriers like Launcher 1 can carry something this impressive up to solar synchronous orbit, which, by the way, is important. This thing's solar panels need to be continuously exposed to the sunlight in order to generate the tiny amount of power that it needs to function. Therefore, it cannot go along on a ride share with most Falcon 9 missions or something of the like, simply because it needs to go to a very particular orbit that most satellites don't go to. And incidentally, polar orbits are also extremely important for observational satellites, as they allow the satellite to maintain a constant observation of the entire planet as the Earth rotates underneath the satellite. So a constellation of these things can maintain the entire planet under close observation. Although the intention of these satellites is very positive. It's not Big Brother looking over our shoulder, not with a 5-meter resolution. It's not designed to look at each one of us and the color of our hair and that sort of thing, but rather weather patterns, as you can see right there. Also, deforestation, crop growth patterns, the distribution of emergency supplies, all of these things so important for the future of the environment, for the development of future cities, made possible by these tiny little satellites. It's an amazing accomplishment, an amazing mission, and undertaken not by people in Silicon Valley, not by people in Western Europe, but rather by people in Poland. And they've only just gotten started, and Virgin Orbit is their partner all the way. That's why this mission was so damned important. And so, after making a short journey from the spaceport out over the Pacific Ocean, off went Launcher 1, powered by a main engine with 75,000 pounds worth of thrust, or nearly 50% more than that of the Electron, and being launched from an altitude of about 10,000 meters. The Cosmic Girl essentially functions as a reusable first stage, with a fairly powerful engine driving the rocket to even further orbits, therefore allowing Virgin Orbit to deliver larger cargoes to higher orbits and more challenging orbits, such as a polar sun-synchronous orbit in this particular case. So, Launcher 1 achieved a speed of about 8,000 miles per hour at this stage of its mission. But after what seemed to me an agonizing number of minutes, the first stage cut off. We had main engine cut off, or MECO. The first stage dropped away, and then we had Newton 4 kick in with 5,000 pounds worth of thrust. Doesn't sound like a lot, but but it's capable of bringing the cargo up to a speed of 17,500 miles per hour simply because you don't have any atmosphere up there to resist your forward momentum. It was, however, at this point that some sharp eyed folks began to notice that the trajectory was no longer nominal but out of corridor. Fortunately, the vehicle still had a fair amount of fuel left in order to do a correctional burn, but nevertheless, tensions were starting to grow. At least they appeared to be, certainly at my end. There was so much at stake here, not just SatRevolution, but also the US military and the Netherlands Air Force, not the Belgians. What was wrong with me? But in any event, the first satellite that they had ever deployed. Several major customers vital to the future of Virgin Orbit, all at stake. For a period of time, as observation stations at the South Pole tried to keep track of Launcher 1 and what it was up to, there was a lot of question marks. Would these satellites deploy at all? Would they deploy in the correct orbits? Well, shortly thereafter, we got our answer. Yes, indeed, all of these satellites were deployed, including the SatRevolution satellites, the Royal Netherlands satellite, which is a proof of concept design to see how quickly satellites can be deployed in an emergency situation, in a God forbid conflict in the future where military satellites are taken out by anti-sat weapons. How rapidly can they be redeployed? Companies like Virgin Orbit can do it. So, as Cosmic Girl returned home to Mojave, some of you may have been asking yourselves, what's the big deal? Just a few hours later, SpaceX sent up over 100 small sats. I mean, why do we need Virgin Orbit at all? Well, the most important thing is this launching system can get satellites into orbit, into the proper orbits for a low price and quickly. You only need an airfield and the proper fueling facilities for a rocket. You don't need a massive pad. You don't need a huge exclusion zone. You don't have to worry about helicopters and airplanes screwing up your launch and forcing a scrub. That's something that seldom happens with horizontal launch systems. Yes, there's a place for something like this. And by the way, I'm not saying that Virgin Orbit is better than Rocket Lab or any of its competitors. I'm saying that the small sat industry is an very exciting industry, one that's going to have a lot of competition, a lot of innovation, and is going to take us not only to low Earth orbit, but as Virgin Orbit also develops solar electric ion engines, which I've covered in previous episodes, it's going to take them all the way to the moon, Mars, and beyond. And so, as the VO ground crew allowed me to take this picture very kindly, and boy, were they in a positive mood, I was left realizing just why this company should be compared to Blue Origin. Look at what they are accomplishing in orbit for so many customers and for mankind, and for a very reasonable price. And in the meantime, Jeff, what have you been doing lately? So, in the end, once again, why does this make that much of a difference? I mean, as I mentioned briefly in the video, SpaceX sent up rather over 100 small sats on Transporter 2. I mean, the Falcon 9 can definitely send up a small sat for less money than Virgin Orbit can, no matter what they do. Well, I hope I've been able to make it clear in the course of this video as to why going up on a ride share is just not acceptable for a lot of clients. It just isn't. You are a slave to the main payload. That rocket is not going up because of the paltry amount of money that your company is spending to get its small sat into orbit. It's going up because a primary payload customer is spending tens of millions of dollars to get their big satellite up into LEO or some other location, and your satellite sure as hell better be going to the very same location or somewhere similar to it orbit wise. Otherwise, it's just not going to get deployed. This is not acceptable. It just isn't. And there are so many other applications that Virgin Orbit can be used for, and companies like it. There is a very large market in the small sat industry. Why do you need to take up 10, 20, 50, 100 metric tons worth of cargo if you can accomplish what your company needs to accomplish with 25 kilograms, 50 kilograms, 1 kilogram? And yes, indeed, there are satellites this small, as you saw from the SatRevolution information, tiny little satellites, as little as a quarter of a kilo. It is crazy what is possible today with micro miniaturization. It's not just about their accomplishment yesterday, it's also what this accomplishment means and what it's going to mean for the human race in the long term. No longer is space restricted to these big institutions, the ESA, NASA, Roscosmos, the people who have tens of millions of dollars to put their payloads into orbit. It's going to get less and less expensive to the point to where small sat providers can put their equipment not only into Earth orbit, but all the way to cislunar space, as I talked about, and all the way to Mars, and as much as 150 kilos all the way out to Mars as far as Virgin Orbit is concerned. This is a big deal. And this mission was a very important thing. You can have a one off mission like they just had a few months ago and say, okay, that was nice, but can they do it again? Well, they did do it again. And they did it on schedule when they said that they were going to. It was a monumental success. And their intention is to start putting out 24 rockets a year, as I said. So 2 launches a month, giving lots and lots of options to smaller customers. Rocket Lab is going to respond in kind, and there are quite a number of other competitors jumping into the field. This whole thing is going to get a lot more nasty, a lot more vicious as the competition turns up, and we'll see who emerges triumphant. But right now, Virgin Orbit just took a massive step forward. If you like what I talk about, if you like the fact that I am covering these sorts of events in ways that the mainstream, even mainstream space media, isn't really covering very much, and other folks may not be covering as much either, just perhaps because there isn't as much money in small sat providers, enough of an audience. I have no idea. But if you like this kind of stuff, it's all in the description and ways to support me, and I would really appreciate it. Or a like and a subscribe, and I would really appreciate that. So until we have our next Virgin Orbit mission, and indeed Virgin Galactic as well, both of which are going to be very exciting. But for me, Virgin Orbit is what's really exciting because it is what is actually going to make the biggest difference to mankind in the long term. Putting things up to orbit for organizations that simply couldn't afford to do it in the past. And that, to me, is the democratization of space, which is what Sir Richard Branson talked about from the beginning. So until that next mission comes up, and hopefully it's just as successful, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.